Hi everyone. So this week we're looking at Genesis chapter 37, and I know that last week was pretty short, but this week definitely makes up for it because there's a lot going on. And we're going to find out more about what happens with Jacob. So verse 1, it says that Jacob stayed in Canaan. Verses 2 and 3 talks about the report on Joseph's life. And he was found to be tending the flocks with his brothers. So this is where the story starts off. Joseph is tending the flocks with his brothers, working hard out in the field. And I noted that God mentioned Jacob by his new name here. He calls him Israel. And like I said in a previous video, God sometimes refers to Jacob as Jacob, and sometimes he refers to him as Israel, kind of that new person. And if you've been following along, you know, Jacob has struggled, with God back and forth between living a life fully devoted to God and what God wants him to do, and falling into temptation and not fully 100% listening to God and following what God wants him to do. And so I thought it was really interesting that in this scripture, God calls him Israel. And Israel made a beautiful robe for Joseph. So think about it. Joseph is working hard in the fields, tending to the flocks with his brothers, and he comes with this beautiful robe adorned with, probably beautiful things, obviously. And when I am cleaning my house, I don't put on my best clothes, right? I'm not getting dressed up to clean my house or to scrub the toilet at my house, So, Joseph was special to Israel, to Jacob. Verse 4, Joseph's brothers were jealous. And remember, they are not God-fearing. They were not kind to him. These are the same brothers that, Reuben, which was the oldest, he slept with one of Jacob's concubines. And that's also one of his brother's mom. They also, two of Joseph's brothers basically killed everyone in an entire city with what had happened with Dinah. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and rewatch the previous videos and you'll see what I'm referring to. They are not God-fearing boys. They are very good at deception. And this I imagine was, exemplified by their father. I strongly believe that what you show your children is what they will do. And the life that you lead and the life that you live is what your kids will probably end up doing as well. So it's so important to choose wisely and to lead by example. Even if you have a little baby, and you're thinking, well, they have some time. Yeah, they may have time, but I think it's so important to establish good habits from when they are young. And I just mean good habits as in, the way that you act, establish how the way you want your children to act in your own life. And that way, when they get older and they see what you're doing, they can also copy it, hopefully. So anyways, moving on. Verses 5 through 7. Now, Joseph, he's funny. So he had a dream, and he was binding sheaves of grain, and his sheaf rose and stood upright while his brothers' sheaves bowed down to him and gathered around his. Now, God speaks to us through many ways. I find that he speaks to me through some of the most simple ways with just his word or watching a sermon, or sometimes I've had, people who are also in the word tell me, God had, wanted me to tell you this. It doesn't happen often. It's only happened a few times in my life, but sometimes that does happen. And so sometimes he speaks to us in dreams, and I've had that happen to me as well. Again, it doesn't happen as often as the more, I think, regular times that we don't expect God to speak to us, like, for example, through a scripture or through a sermon or something like that. But yeah, so God spoke to Joseph in a dream. And what did Joseph do? He knew that his brothers were jealous. I'm sure they didn't hide their jealousy. And he told his brothers, I didn't mention that, but Joseph told his brothers the dream. And of course they were angry. They are jealous of him. He's already this, favored child of Israel. And he's wearing this beautiful robe. And now he's telling them this dream that they're bowing down to him, essentially. So they were angry. And I wrote, Joseph should have kept this information to himself. And I also wrote, you don't have to tell everyone your dreams. And this is vital. So I am a person who, I don't share much, but I feel like if I share something with someone and they break that confidence, right, and they tell someone else, I will literally never tell them anything again. And I feel like we have to protect our dreams. We need to protect the things that we harbor most in our hearts, the things that we feel like God has put on our hearts that will come to pass. I have so many dreams, both personal and with this channel, that I feel like God has put in my heart. And there's only, there's some of them that I haven't told anyone, except for my husband, because he supports me 100%. But really, there's so many things that I have in my heart that I haven't told a single soul. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, sometimes people are well-meaning and they want the best for you, but they will say something that's negative. And, maybe they think of it as constructive criticism. But so before I started this channel, I had, a dream I feel like I had God placed that dream in my heart. And I feel like if I told someone, too many people beforehand, they would have discouraged me from not doing it because of negative comments and saying, well, you don't want to do that because it's going to take up a lot of time, or, I don't know, whatever it is that people may say. And that could have deterred me from starting. And so even though some people may have valid points, right? They may be correct in what they're saying, but here's the key. They are not you. They don't know what God has placed in your heart. They don't know what God can do for you, through you. Only you and God have that personal, close relationship where if you feel like God is placing something on your heart, go for it 100%. You don't have to look for people. And that's another thing too. Sometimes we want validation from people. We're not telling someone else because we want them to, talk some sense into us. And I say that with quotations, right? Talk some sense into us. We're just telling them because sometimes it just feels good to have that approval from man. Unfortunately. But I think when God places something on our hearts and we go for it, right? And at first, maybe it doesn't look like anything's happening, and you keep going and you keep going and it doesn't look like anything's happening. But then you get to a point where you're looking at the progress that you've made and you're thinking, wow, God really is working. God really is moving in this area. That's where we start to learn how to trust God more and trust what he's saying more and not even need the approval of man. I am so fortunate that I've gotten to a point in my relationship with God where I feel like I can hear him speak, and I really could care less what other people think, what they have, what opinion they have, and what I should do, and what other people what kind of input they may have on a dream that I feel like God has placed in my heart. And I mean that in the most respect. I really don't care because I know that God has spoken to me and I know that he's telling me to do something. And so I just go for it. And so with this channel, for example, at first, the first year of this channel, I think I had gained about 100 subscribers. And, subscribers, I don't care if it's 5 or 5,000. Every single person who has subscribed is just so special and important and near and dear to my heart. But just for the purposes of this video, I'm just drawing an example. So the first year probably got around 100 subscribers. And that was amazing to me. That was great. I was so excited. But on the flip side, I think maybe to someone else that would be not so encouraging to work on a channel for a whole year and only get 100 subscribers. Maybe to someone else that they might look at that and say, wow, you really didn't do much in that whole first year. And then, I wouldn't know that the second year I would gain, over 4,000 subscribers, so it just goes to show. And I'm talking about this timeline. A lot of my videos from that first year are now private because I've changed the direction of the channel. Whole different story. But anyways, I'm just trying to draw an example and say, sometimes you may start to do something that God has placed in your heart and you feel like nothing's happening, right? You're like, God, did you really talk to me? Did you really tell me to do this? Because I don't see, the fruition. I don't see what you are trying to do here. I don't see any results, but just keep going. I promise you, just keep going. And so let me go back to what else. I just kind of went off on a tangent. I'm sorry, but I just want to go back to this. Don't tell anyone. You don't have to tell everyone your dreams. I tell my husband, and that's about it, because I know that he will support me. And sometimes you don't have to tell people, what you're doing, what you're about to do. I would rather do it and then tell people. That's just how I am, though. And maybe Joseph should have exercised some caution. I think, well, we'll find out in a second. So verse 8, Joseph's brothers did not want him to rule over them, clearly, and they hated him. Verses 9 through 11, Joseph told them about another dream. So Joseph had another dream. Okay, so he knows they're jealous of him. He knows that they're angry. He knows that they hate him. But what does he do? He had another dream, and it was the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. So the 11 stars were his brothers, and the sun and the moon were Jacob and Rachel. That I'm guessing. I mean, that just makes the most sense. And what does Joseph. What does Joseph do? He tells his brothers. He told them all again. And I wrote, didn't Rachel die? And then I'm thinking that perhaps this happened prior to her death. So I think Genesis was going along in chronological order, and then the story kind of stopped to tell us a little bit about what happened to Joseph before Rachel died. So that's what I think happened here. If you're wondering, why Rachel is mentioned here. So he told his brothers again, and even Jacob became upset with this, and his brothers grew more jealous. So again, if God has placed something in your heart, you don't have to tell anyone. And I feel like Joseph probably was being a little bit braggy. And that's another thing. If God has placed a big dream on your heart and God is going to use you in a really cool way, in a big way. And I say big very lightly, because if God has called you to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of your kids, that's a big dream. That's a big way that God can use you in your life. I think sometimes our society looks at, big, in a sense of if you're in front of others, if you're on a platform, right? If you have an audience, but that God doesn't look at things like that. So please, I don't want to come across as, only big things or things that if you're preaching to a large audience, that's not the only big thing God can do. And so anyway, sometimes if God has placed something on our hearts that other people may be jealous of, you shouldn't really share that with others just for the sole purpose of bragging and saying, well, look at me, God chose me to do this great thing. So I wrote Jacob, but I should have wrote Joseph. Joseph should have said nothing. And I wrote Matthew 6:1. And, funny enough, we're looking at Matthew. We just finished up that series on Matthew chapter 6. I will link it below, and I'll have it in the cards if you haven't checked it out. Go ahead. It's an in-depth study. And it is saying in Matthew 6, and I'm going to turn to it in my notes, actually. So Matthew 6:1, be careful. It starts off with be careful. Don't practice your righteousness in front of others. And that can mean even, if you have a dream from God, you don't have to share it with everyone. Like if you want to share it with someone that you trust, maybe you have someone in your church or whatever that, supports you spiritually and you want to share it with them so they can pray for you or whatever it is, that's one thing. But if you have, I feel like Joseph had this dream and he wanted to tell them because he wanted them to continue being jealous of him. Honestly, maybe that's why he told them, because there's no way he would figure, my brothers hate me and they're jealous of me. Let me tell them this other thing so they could be even more jealous. I'm guessing that's why he did that. Verses 12 through 14. Israel sent Joseph to Shechem to check on his brothers who were tending to the flock. And I thought that was interesting because Joseph where was he? He was home, with Israel, with his shiny robe and his dreams that God was going to have his brothers serve him and bow down to him. So Joseph wasn't even in the fields with his brothers anymore. He went to Shechem, and the first thing I thought of with Shechem was what happened with Dinah. So sad. Again, I will link that in the cards and in the description box down below. But if you're not up to speed, that's where Dinah was unfortunately violated. And that was in Genesis 34. So I just got a bad feeling immediately. So Joseph went to Shechem to look for his brothers and to check on them, probably to bring back a report to his dad, what they were doing. In verses 16 through 18, Joseph couldn't find his brothers, and a man told him that they moved on to Dothan. Sorry, my writing is not that neat right here. And when they saw Joseph, so when his brothers saw Joseph from afar, they planned to kill him. And I thought that was so interesting because they saw him from far away. It's not like, they saw him from far away and immediately got angry, and they immediately had that thought to kill him. And I said, I wrote right here, thoughts. That's the power of your thoughts. Whenever you're having a thought, a bad thought, stop it right in its tracks. And I've done a video on thoughts. Again, I'll put that in the cards and link it down below. But yeah, they had a thought, an evil thought, to kill their brother. Verses 19 through 20, they said, here comes the dreamer. And I can imagine them saying that, here comes the dreamer with his colorful robe. They made fun of him. And Joseph's dreams were from God. And what God says will be done, regardless of Joseph's intentions on making his brothers jealous or not, or bragging or what have you. The fact of the matter is that God said it will be done, and it will be done no matter what happens. Verse 21 through 22. So Reuben, who was the oldest, he tried to save Joseph by lying to his brothers. He suggested throwing Joseph into a pit and rescuing him late. And he wanted to rescue him later, but he didn't want them to know that. And I put, maybe he didn't want to outright defend Joseph in fear that they would kill him too. I mean, they sound like, pretty awful people. They would kill their own brother. So maybe Reuben didn't want to say, let's not kill him. He didn't want to stand up to his other brothers because maybe he thought that, they would kill him too. You're defending the dreamer. So we're going to throw you, we're going to kill you as well. So even though Reuben had good intentions, we'll see what happens. Verse 23 through 24, they took Joseph's robe and threw him into an empty well, and then they ate. So they listened to Reuben, and, they said, fine, let's just throw him into this empty well. And Reuben thought everything was going well and that he would just rescue him later. And the brothers were okay with his brother being in an empty well, and they sat down to eat. That just goes to show how barbaric almost these boys are. I mean, I can't imagine doing that to anyone, let alone my own flesh and blood. That's just awful. So Joseph is, in this empty well, probably screaming, probably, asking them to get him out, and they're just eating as if nothing is going on. Verse 26. Judah figured they can get rid of Joseph and make money by selling him to the Ishmaelites and as a slave. And he said, after all, he is our own flesh and blood. So Judah's like, you know what? Instead of killing him or leaving him in the well, let's just make some money off of him and sell him as a slave. Again, just absolutely insane. Verse 28. So they ended up selling Joseph for 20 shekels of silver. I tried to look up how much that would be worth, in those times, but I didn't really find much information on that. If you know, please let me know. I'm so interested to know if that was a lot of money or not. Not that it matters, because, you shouldn't sell your sibling into slavery, but I'm just curious. Verse 29 through 30. Reuben returned and he saw that Joseph was gone, and he was upset. And so Reuben, instead of speaking up and being the voice of reason and just saying, let's not do this at all, he kind of backtracked on his actions here. And he was upset because his plan to kind of rescue Joseph was now gone because his brothers sold Joseph into slavery. Verse 31 through 34. Oh, just awful. The deception continues. They lied to their dad. They took Joseph's robe, killed a goat, poured the blood on the robe. So they killed a goat and they poured the goat's blood on Joseph's robe. Then they took it back to their father, pretending they didn't know it was Joseph's. And Jacob assumed that Joseph was killed by an animal. And it said that Jacob mourned until death. He didn't want the comfort of his family. And he was just so upset. And the boys, they said, is this Joseph's jacket? Is this Joseph's robe? I don't know. How can they look their dad in their eye and say, is this Joseph's robe? When they knew they killed a goat and put the goat's blood on it to make it seem like Joseph got attacked by an animal. That's just awful. They don't even care about their own father, apparently. Verse 36. Meanwhile, God is working, and he is always working. Even if you think he's not, he is working in the background. And I said, if you think you are in a horrible situation, God can work it out. Joseph was sold in Egypt to Potiphar, which was one of Pharaoh's officials, who was also the captain of the guards. And we will see what will happen with Joseph because God is with Joseph. He is always working. These boys thought that they did something to Joseph that will, affect his life for the rest of his life. They thought that they would just get rid of him. But what they don't know is that God is faithful. And what God says will happen will. It doesn't matter what man tries to do or manipulate or stop. You can't stop God. He cannot be stopped. And so God is working in Joseph's life. So if you're in a tough situation right now, I want to let you know God is working in your life right now, even through the bad times, through the times that you're thinking, what's going to happen next? I have no idea, God. He will work it out for your good. I promise you that. I promise you. And I will pray for you. So that was it for Genesis 37. Next week, we'll look at Genesis 38. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. It really helps to support it. I post a new video every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I can't wait to study the Bible with you again. Bye.